Hello and welcome to my latest huge library haul video. I'm Rebecca and I'm surrounded by books, so let's get into it. A lot of these books come from recommendations from other YouTube channels, and so for the most part, instead of just mentioning every channel that I have gotten the recommendations from, I'm just gonna link their channels below so that you can go to them, because generally speaking, if they're linked below, they're booktubers that I find their recommendations really kind of jive with the kinds of books and styles that I'm interested in too. My plan is to share them in categories. So the first category that I'm going to start with is just new releases for 2022. We have a pretty rural library, and so I'm very excited when they have new releases that are available to patrons shortly after being published. And then within that category of new releases in 2022, I'm gonna first share the young adult books, because the only young adult books that I have, I think, are within these 2022 releases. First is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Alexi O. This is a story of a village who gives a sacrifice of a beautiful girl to a sea god. On the night that they are going to sacrifice this chosen girl, another girl goes in her stead and discovers, as she enters into the spirit world, that the sea god is actually in need of saving himself. And so this is her story of fighting demons and being a human in the spirit world in an effort to save the sea god. The cover is so beautiful. Next is Only a Monster by Vanessa Len. This is the story about Joan, who goes and stays with her eccentric family during summer vacation, and she meets a boy as she is out and about, and through a series of events, she discovers that she is actually part of a family of monsters, and that this boy she has met is part of a family of monster hunters. And so it seems like it's kind of that typical enemies to lovers trope, possibly. And then Joan is then kind of thrown into this wanting to help her family mode. So it says, in every story there is a hero and a monster. She is not the hero. And then next we have African Town by Irene Latham and Charles Waters. So this is the story of slavery ending and there not being a need for slave ships anymore, but apparently there was one last trader who got one last boatload of slaves. And this follows, I believe, 5 men and women along this last ship. It's called the Clotilda. And then it seems to follow their life, and it is inspired by the true story of the survivors of the last American slave ship. Okay, so that's it for young adult books, but now we have a couple more for 2022. And the first one is The Bookseller by Carrie Maher. I actually have a lot of bookshop type books. I am doing a deep dive into books that I can find at my library and on SCRIBD that are about bookshops. I like doing themed reading sometimes, and I've chosen Bookshops for this spring. So this is The Paris Bookseller. This is about Sylvia Beach, who is an American who opened up Shakespeare and Company bookstore in Paris. It is inspired by a true story, and she ends up interacting with many famous authors during that time, like Ernest Hemingway and James Joyce, and it is her story of having to fight for Shakespeare and Company as a bookstore, as well as dealing with the Depression and all of the issues that surround being an expatriate in a foreign country. And then the last 2022 book that I have is middle grade. It is called New From Here by Kelly Yang. This one really is recent because it is a story about a boy, Knox, who moves from Hong Kong right as COVID-19 hits, and he moves to California with his family, and he deals with what we know of impending racism on Asian people in America. And then also his struggle because part of his family stays back in Hong Kong while he's in California with other parts of his family, and so missing them. So I just thought this was a creative take on it, and I'm excited to read this one. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and move back into the bookshop ones and come back to middle grade because I have so many middle grade. So like I said, I like to do themed reading, and I decided to do Bookshops. So these are just all the books that I was able to grab from the library that have a bookshop theme. So other than mentioning the 2022 book, I think I'm going to do a separate video on my themed reading of Bookshops and share what I found, and hopefully plan to be able to share my thoughts on them. So rather than going through all of them, I'm just going to quickly highlight a few of them. So I've got 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanth, and this was actually published in 1970, and it is an epistolary novel that has correspondence between a freelance writer living in New York City and a used book dealer in London. And they never met, but they had a friendship, and it is all documented in this book. It's really thin. I've heard really great things about this book though. Next, I have The Yellow Lighted Bookshop, and this is by Louis Busby, and this is a memoir. And Busby is a bookseller and sales representative who travels to all these different bookshops. And so it is even mentioned the Sylvie Beach's Paris bookstore, the Shakespeare and Company that I mentioned earlier. That's mentioned in here, as well as various other bookshops. Just really quickly, since I'm on the Sylvia Beach theme, I also grabbed a picture book about bookshops, and this is Sylvia's Bookshop by Robert Burleigh, and it just has a picture book story about this. So my kids and I will read it, and I am excited for the back matter as well. And my plan here, maybe I shouldn't do that. And then I also grabbed this middle grade one, The Bookshop Girl. Calling all book lovers, could you be the next owner of the Great Montgomery Book Emporium? For the chance to win, simply enter the Grand Montgomery Drawing. There are literally no terms or conditions. Really thin there. And then the last one that I wanted to highlight is Bibliophile. It's a book about books. Curious about bookstores. I cannot wait to slowly go through this book. Okay, so now into middle grade. We're still in middle grade March, and so I have Lizzie Bright and the Buckminster Boy. This is by Gary D. Schmidt. This is the true story, but fictionalized, about an island off the coast of Maine, Malaga Island, where African Americans had settled in shanties, and the white occupants of surrounding towns forced them to move. And this is the story about a white boy who befriends one of the African Americans who lives on the island, and it's really coming of age and just a really hard topic, but I am excited to get into this. So next I have Out of My Heart by Sharon Draper. This is the sequel to Out of My Mind. And this is a story about a girl who has cerebral palsy, and I've heard that this one is such a tearjerker. The first one kind of sets the stage for just the girl's personality and how smart she is, but how the world really doesn't understand that. And supposedly this one, she's able to start communicating more and having greater experiences, and so I'm really excited to read this. Next is Counting by Sevens. And this is by Holly Goldberg Sloan. So much good things about this. I know Amanda from the Curly Reader loves this, and the main character I think has autism. I don't know if it's fully spelled out, but she certainly seems to be presented as having autism. And so I think it's not much of a spoiler because it happens right in the first chapter, but she becomes an orphan, and it is her coming of age growth. Next is The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise. She and her dad live in a schoolie, and as somebody who loves that RV life, I'm so excited to read this. Next on my list is Echo Mountain by Lauren Wolk. She is most well known for writing Wolf Hollow, but this is the story about a girl whose father is ill during the Depression, and I think she decides to go up into the mountains and find an old woman who may have these homeopathic, she may be like a witch of some sorts, healing for her father. And I honestly think that half the reason I want to read this is because of the cover. Maybe more than half. Next is The Chance to Fly. My oldest picked this out. All I know about it is that the main character is in a wheelchair and obviously likes to perform. She's already over halfway done and says that she loves it. It's really cute. My oldest also grabbed Augie and Me. She loved Wonder, and so she wanted to grab this one as the sequel to it. It follows along 3 characters that I think were in Wonder. And I think there's like some redemption for some of more unkind characters and information about maybe some of side characters that we didn't see that much. Then we have 96 Miles by J.L. Esplin. This is one that I just grabbed. It is the story about 2 boys whose father is like really big into self-reliance, and they're supposed to be able to survive anything. They live out in Nevada, which you can tell. Somehow they end up getting robbed of all of their supplies, and they end up having to walk 96 miles in the desert sun to get help. And it says it is a suspense thriller, survival story, and a story of love between brothers. And that quote is from Gary Schmidt, who I just had with Lizzie Bright and the Buckminster Boy. And then he's also the author of Pay Attention, Carter Jones. And I think this is just like a funny story about a chaotic family who ends up with a butler who tries to control the chaos. And there's a lot of pushback on it. I'm not sure. My son grabbed this one. Okay, the next 3 have animals as main character, was the theme that I came up with. So A Wolf Called Wander. My son grabbed this, and I really want to read it. It is the true story of a wolf that ended up traveling 1,000 miles across the Pacific Northwest. And then Willowdean by Catherine Applegate. We actually have 3 by Catherine Applegate. So Willowdean is, I think it's like some magical character. Yeah, it's got hummingbirds, and there's like screechers that come after them. I'm not 100% sure, but it's kind of, it says it's mystery, so, but I figured, like, I'm assuming those are screechers in the background and those are the hummingbirds. And then next is The Endling, The Last. This is the first book. I've seen this everywhere, and I honestly don't know that much about it, but I do tell my kids, if there's a map in the front of the book, you know it's gonna be good. And lastly, by Catherine Applegate, is The One and Only Bob. I should have said, Catherine Applegate is most known for writing The One and Only Ivan. This is the sequel to that, and it is about the dog. And my son is currently reading this, and he is literally laughing out loud as he reads it. It is so cute. And she very much, like, understands dogs. Said, confession. Look, nobody's ever accused me of being a good dog. I bark at empty air. I eat cat litter. I roll in garbage to enhance my aroma. I harass innocent squirrels. I hog the couch. I lick myself in the presence of company. I'm no saint, okay? She really understands dog behavior. Okay, 2 kind of like puzzle middle grade books is City Spies by James Ponti. This is the story about Sarah, who is a hacker, and she ends up working as an agent I love this. Operating out of a centuries-old manor house on the coast of Scotland, she ends up becoming kind of part of this system of spies, and she ends up having to go into Paris and try to hack into this international organization. And there's obviously more characters than just Sarah, but I've heard really good things about this, so I grabbed it. Next is The Book Scavenger by Jennifer Chambliss-Bertman. This kind of reminds me of Mr. Lemoncello's library. She probably hates hearing that, but it's basically like the Mr. Lemoncello is missing. So Griswold is his name. So, and there's like this, she's got to follow clues throughout the city to try to figure out where Griswold is. A hidden book, a found cipher, a game begins. I've read this before, but my kids have not, and we just finished Mr. Lemoncello's library, and I thought it is time for this. It's a super book. I think there's more in this series. We really like fantasy as a genre. Middle grade fantasy. I love YA fantasy, but middle grade fantasy is kind of where we're at. So we have Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This has been on my TBR forever. I've had it from the library. I took it back. I got it back out again. I am about halfway through it at this point, and I really enjoy it. I can see why it became a movie. So I should probably put that to the side so I can make sure I finish it. Kiki Kalira Breaks a Kingdom. This is the story about Kiki, who is an artist. She deals with her anxiety by drawing. One day she magically falls into her sketchbook and discovers that the world in her sketchbook has come alive and is real, and she ends up having to save this sketchbook world as well as her own real world. Next is The Emerald Atlas by John Stevens. This is a story of 3 kids, Kate, Michael, and Emma, who find this beautifully bound atlas, and this atlas unleashes its powers. This one also has screechers in it. It is the first stage of a journey of the 3 kids with lots of magic and magical creatures, and I'm just really hoping to get to this one in an already way too big stack. When You Trap a Tiger by Tay Keller. This, I think, won the Newbery, and this is a story about a girl who moved in with their sick grandmother, and she starts seeing this magical tiger from Korean folklore. And supposedly she's seeing this tiger because there is a debt that her family needs to repay the tigers. The rest of these my kids picked out. So these are ones that my kids picked out. The first one is The Unmapped Chronicles, Casper Talk and the Everdark Wings by Albie F. Elphinstone. I mean, it just looks exciting. The map you know holds well-known lines shaped, scored, and inked in olden times. These 2 are both written by Sarah Beth Durst. One is The Girl Who Could Not Dream, and the other one is Spark. So, I mean, I think both of these are very much like high fantasy. Like, there's a lightning school that they go to. There's a totally different world with beasts and guardians. So, very high fantasy, but not too thick. And it's got a dragon, and it says, even the quietest voice can change the world. And then this one, it goes along with my bookshop theme in that the girl's parents own a bookshop. There's a world apparently under the bookshop that she visits, and it turns out that there's like stealing of magic going on, and she has to figure out how to correct the wrongs that have been done. Fablehaven 4. So Brandon Mull has written a lot of different series, so figuring out which number 4 to get was kind of challenging, but this is the 4th one of the Fablehaven series, Secrets of the Dragon Sanctuary. My oldest is reading this. And then she got these 2, The School of Good and Evil by Soman Chainani. I think it's like dark academia for middle grade. It's super thick, but my oldest saw these and wanted to get them, and I think there's probably like a little bit of romance going on, because you can tell the second book there's a boy right in between them. So I've got When Stars Are Scattered. This was another recommendation, I think, from Amanda the Curly Reader. This is the story about two brothers who are in a refugee camp. And it's thick for a middle grade graphic novel, I think. This one is also from Amanda the Girly Reader. So this is Cece's journal, The Adventures of a Writer in Training, Jory Chamblain. It's translated from French, and it is the story about a girl who keeps a journal of all of her interactions with people. So she wants to be a writer. Her own journal pages are in there. Next is a Persephone retelling, except this one is about the story of her kind of figuring out the circumstances surrounding her birth. But this one is not middle grade. I think that's one of the things to remember about graphic novels, is that in our library at least, they are shelved over in the children's section, and they're not all meant for children. So this is an adult graphic novel. And this one might be also, I'm not sure, I haven't read it. It's the Tea Dragon Society. It goes through all of the seasons. So it's got winter, and then it also has autumn, but I thought the cover looked very much like spring, and I think it starts off with spring. So I am going to read through this. I know my oldest really is interested in it, but I told her I needed to read it first, because again, with graphic novels, you just don't know. This is not a graphic novel, but it doesn't really fit in any of the other categories, so I just wanted to share it. It is The Art of the Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, and this has been edited by Tolkien experts Hammond and Christina Scull, and there is just some analysis of his own artwork. So we have his Father Christmas book, and in it he has his own drawings. So he was an artist of sorts, and so this is just kind of his sketches. This is for Vendel. It just kind of has his sketches, and then there's an explanation of what's going on in that, in conjunction with what happens in the book. So I will not do a deep dive into this, but it still looked enough of an interest for me to just kind of flip through it. Last, I have homeschool books. My oldest is getting into bonsai. So we grabbed the Bonsai Beginner's Bible, Happy Bonsai, and the Bonsai Survival Manual. You can see it's all marked. She's taking copious notes. We have Just Like Me. This is 40 neurologically and physically diverse people who broke stereotypes. There is Daniel Radcliffe, who plays Harry Potter. Answering the Cry for Freedom, Stories of African Americans in the American Revolution. We are studying the American Revolution, and so we're just kind of flipping through and finding each chapter is about a different person. And so we're just kind of flipping through and finding the people that we would like to read about. I am pre-reading them because some of them have some pretty challenging stories. But so far I've really liked that as a resource. The Escape of Oni Judge, Martha Washington's Slave Finds Freedom by Emily Arnold McCulley. It's a picture book. Then we have Dear Benjamin Banneker. This is illustrated by Brian Pinkney and written by Andrea Pinkney. And I love these. This is like the etching artwork. I have two Cheryl Harness books, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. So far I've been pleased with the Thomas Jefferson book in that it does address the Sally Hemings relationship in a, easier for children to understand way, not in a salacious way. And then John Adams, we have those two. I have A Drop of Water by Walter Wick, and we have this for science. I just love the photographs in here. So we're studying chemistry. So we will read this. I have the Book of Discoveries by Tim Cook. We just started reading this one. But it's categorized by different topics, and then it explains the different people who are involved in certain discoveries that have been made. And then lastly, we have Viking World, The Age of Seafarers and Sagas by Robert McLeod. It is just such an interesting book. We're not studying Vikings at all, but my youngest saw this and could not resist getting it. All right, you guys, here are all the books that we have checked out from the library. Maybe I should do a video sometime on how we keep track of them so that we don't, fingers crossed, lose them. Until next time. How piled up should I have the books go?